Gaze reading where the greats drop by. Trendy authors tell us all the who, what, and why. Anyone can listen cause we're spoiler free. Gaze reading from Pulitzer stars to book club picks, where the curious minds can get their fix. So you say you're not gay, well that's okay. There's something for everyone. Gaze reading.
Hello, and welcome to Gaze Reading. I'm your host, Jason Blitman. Welcome back to those who have been here before, and to those who are new to Gaze Reading. Where have you been? Just kidding. Happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And if you don't know, we are also on YouTube. You can watch the videos of this conversation and some other great conversations that I've had with fantastic authors over at our YouTube channel. You could find that link in the show notes and also the link tree in the Instagram page. And if you can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, it is so incredibly helpful for the algorithm and to help other folks find Gaze Reading. While you're at it, if you want to leave us a 5-star review, it is super greatly appreciated. While I'm doing the rest of this intro, you could just, scooch on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening and just tap the 5 stars. It's so helpful. And thank you in advance. And thank you to those who have already written a review and given us 5 stars. And follow us on social media. We're at Gaze Reading on Instagram. We have a new giveaway every single Thursday, so make sure to check that out over on Instagram. This has been my month of TJs. Earlier this month, I interviewed TJ Newman for her new book, Worst Case Scenario, which is so fun. That was an in-person event that you can't find anywhere online, but it was such a great conversation. She's so awesome. And her new book, Worst Case Scenario, it's like a summer blockbuster. It's so delicious. I devoured it sitting by the pool in 2 days. Check it out. On today's episode, we have the fantastic TJ Klune. If you are unfamiliar with his work, his bio is in the show notes. He's here to talk about the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And I realized that we sort of talk about House in the Cerulean Sea without really saying what it's about. So here's the logline if you're unfamiliar. The House in the Cerulean Sea is an enchanting love story about the profound experience of discovering an unlikely family in an unexpected place and realizing that family is yours. And so Somewhere Beyond the Sea is a sequel to that. And that's what he's here to talk to us about. Every book that we talk about, including both of TJ's books, including TJ Newman's book, can be found in the bookshop.org page. The link to that is in the show notes. And today's guest gay reader is the adorable, very handsome, very charming James Scully, who is currently starring in the hit play on Broadway, Oh, Mary. He is coming to me from his bathtub because his super was in his apartment fixing his air conditioning. So he will not be appearing on YouTube. You cannot see his adorable face. And, whether or not he was clothed in his bathtub will be up to your imagination. I am also so excited to share that I am partnering with Aardvark Book Club to provide an exclusive introductory discount to new members in the United States. You could join today, enter the code Gaze Reading at checkout, and get your first book for $4 and free shipping. Such a huge savings. And there are already a whole bunch of authors, a whole bunch of books that have been on Gaze Reading that Aardvark has in their collection. And if you're unfamiliar, it's a monthly book subscription, shipping to the US and Canada. On the first of every month, they drop between 5 and 6 books that are new releases. They're across genres, literary fiction, fantasy, romance. They're curated from buzzy new releases and under the radar gems and everything in between. And if you don't follow them on social media, their social media is killer. Aardvark Book Club on Instagram. And again, go to their website, aardvarkbookclub.com. Get your first box for $4 with the code Gaze Reading. And now, please welcome to Gaze Reading, TJ Klune. I typically sport scruff and a mustache, but you're very anti-mustache in this book. And so
you can do whatever you want. It's totally fine.
I didn't want to be offensive.
That's fun.
Is that a sore subject?
No,
Can
not
I
at all. Not
ask?
at all. That was just something that I grew up with. My father, when I was a kid, had a very huge mustache. It was very prickly and bristly, and this is one of those things that comes up.
So trauma.
Trauma. Exactly. Exactly. Trauma. A queer kid with trauma. No way.
Shocking.
Yeah, no.
A couple of weeks ago, when I posted an Instagram story that I was reading the first book, House in the Cerulean Sea, I got more responses from non-bookish people than I've ever in my life posting about books.
Yeah.
The people were coming out of the woodwork to tell me how much they love the book, how special it is to them, how they can't wait for me to read it. And that must feel warm and fuzzy inside for you.
It does to an extent. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot about how people found the first book. They found it at a time during the pandemic because it came out March 17th, 2020, the week the pandemic exploded in the United States. And so, I in going into writing a sequel, I was very much aware that the element of surprise is gone. I cannot recreate the moments that people had when they found the first book, because a lot of people found that book in a time when everything was scary and up in the air. Nobody could leave their homes. And I can't recreate that feeling, nor do I want to. But I will say that the level of fandom that have surrounded these books has been extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. And, I love the weight of expectation because I know that I'm going to blow everyone out of the water.
Yeah. And I didn't post that I was reading
Yeah.
because I didn't want to make anyone jealous.
You would have some people losing their minds because these were very minimal. There weren't a whole lot of these, and then the actual digital arc, was only the first 4 chapters.
Just the excerpt.
Yeah, because I'm trying to keep this book as much secret as I can.
One of the responses to the initial story was someone sharing their love of Chauncey, and so I did let her know. I said, heads up, if you love Chauncey in book 1, not only will you love, oh man.
Yeah, these are the Chauncey plushies that are going to be sold in Barnes and Nobles across the country that start when the book comes out.
Oh my God. I want them all. But I said to her, if you love Chauncey in book 1, you're going to become even more obsessed with him in book 2, and just you wait until you meet David.
Yeah. So Chauncey is my favorite character in these books. He's my favorite character that I've written. And he's kind of the reason the sequel exists, because I tend to hear voices in my head of characters talking to me. And when I finish with a book, those voices tend to go back to sleep or go away wherever they went to. Chauncey doesn't shut up. Chauncey keeps on talking. Chauncey is very demanding. And so I kind of figured there might be more, but yes, Chauncey is, when the book came out, I honestly expected everybody to glom onto Lucy, which fair. Lucy is a very cool character, but the level of Chauncey love, man, has blown me away, because Chauncey he's a bundle of joy. And I think that's wonderful to be able to see. And then we have David. Yes, David the Yeti. David the Yeti. Who is...
I really fell in love with him very quickly.
Who is based... He is based upon one of my favorite characters of all time, and that's Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes. If you know Calvin, if you've read those books, those comic strips as a kid, you will know that Calvin has a very active imagination, and he plays different characters. And one of the characters he plays in his head is a noir detective called Tracer Bullet. And so I wanted to bring that kind of energy into the book. So when Arthur and Linus meet David for the first time, he puts on a performance for them. And that directly pulls from Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes, because I adore that boy, and I adore David and how he makes his home with all the rest of the kids.
So we've gotten a tiny bit ahead of ourselves. For our listeners who, let's say, unfamiliar with the world, but let's, for the most part, assume lots of folks have read Cerulean Sea. What is an elevator pitch for Somewhere Beyond the Sea?
Somewhere Beyond the Sea is what happens after the happy ending. What happens when the world keeps telling you no, And what do you do then? What steps do you take to ensure that your world and the world of your family and your children, your friends, are on a path that can be sustainable for everyone? And then what happens when you still get told no? So what do? You go out and make your own world. And that's what this book has been about. The reason that this book exists, the reason that the sequel exists at all, and it's something very important for me to talk about as a cis white gay man, is that the reason this book exists is because of the anti-trans movement that has perpetuated across the United States. For those not aware, in 2021 and 2022, the government of the United States held hearings where parents and guardians of trans youth, transgender people, and gender-affirming medical professionals were invited to testify in front of the government. But what they did not know was that it was essentially an ambush, because the politicians fell into two camps. They either said, we see you, we hear you, and then they turned around and voted against pro-trans legislation. Or the worst ones, the politicians who sat there with their smarmy condescension and questioned trans people on their bodies, on their minds, on their rights to exist. They accused parents and guardians of transing their children. They doubted the medical backing of the gender-affirming medical professionals that testified. That really absolutely bugged the hell out of me, especially with the advent of all this anti-trans nonsense that's permeating through the United States and through the UK. And so I remembered at the very end of The House in the Cerulean Sea, it was hinted at that Arthur was invited to testify in front of the government. And I thought, what would happen if that was the same kind of ambush? What would happen if you are invited to a place to speak your truth and only to come to find out that that's not what is in the plans at all? I got to speak with some of those people who were involved in testifying. I got to speak to a few of them, and I asked them all different questions, but one question was the same all the way through. Knowing what you know now, would you do this all over again, knowing what the blowback is going to be? Every single person I spoke to said unequivocally yes. And the reason being is they got to speak their truths. It is important for me to speak about that because, unfortunately, some of the biggest transphobes in the world are cis white gay men. So it is important for me that we remember that it is LGBTQ. It's not LGB without the T, without the Q. That is not how it is. Trans people have always been here. They will always be here. And it's important for me that I stick up for my community. If I use my platform to just tell stories, then what am I even doing? I have a duty and an obligation to speak up for my community.
And the book, I mean, is very subtle.
As a sledgehammer, yes. And the reason being is that some people need to have that message beaten into their heads.
100%. Something that I was really thinking about a lot throughout reading both books is, and this is, you might take this as a lofty statement because you wrote them. I didn't, so I'm allowed to say it.
Okay, go ahead.
I sort of feel like this being both House on the Cerulean Sea and Beyond the Sea could be doing for readers today what Animal Farm did for readers in 1945.
Wow. That is a lofty statement. Holy crap. And I appreciate that.
I did warn you. And I said you couldn't be the one to say it.
Right.
But upon thinking about that and doing a little bit of research, I discovered that the book was published 16 days before the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just such an interesting thought exercise to like understand time and place and what was an important text of the time, right? And we find ourselves in a time and place with, you know, maybe more texts of the time, but certainly that would fit on the shelf with Animal Farm-esque books.
Right.
To really talk about the world that we're living in.
Right. And, you know, it goes back to that idea of subtlety in a way, is that I
right.
because I think a lot about, you know, when I write these books, anytime I write, I think about my queer audience first and foremost. My books are for anyone who wants to read them. Anybody can pick them up, but I think about my queer readers because I never got to see myself in fiction when I was a kid. And if I did, the character was getting sick. They were getting killed, or they were there to be the very valuable lesson for the straight counterparts. The very first queer novel that I read at the age of 15 was The Frontrunner by Patricia Nell Warren. And that book came out in the 70s and was the first critical and commercial success of a quote unquote gay novel. And of course, sorry to spoil a 50-year-old book, but of course that book ends with the murder of one of the main characters, the love interest of it. He's assassinated.
Well,
at the
sure. It
Olympics.
was also written by a straight woman.
Yes, exactly. And I think about what we get to see and to see ourselves in. I mean, how many books can you say have a fat, fussy man in his 40s as the main character, as the hero of the story? That's how The House in the Cerulean Sea was. We don't get to see people like that being the heroes of the books, even though most people look like Linus, act like Linus, talk like Linus. We're not all beautiful, pretty people with six-pack abs and, whatever. I love how normal and ordinary he is, because I think it takes someone normal and ordinary to do something extraordinary.
Absolutely. Speaking of, if queerness is a magical trait, what sort of power would you say it gives you?
So when I was a kid and coming into my queerness, when I came out with kind of a chip on my shoulder, because I grew up in a home that
does not come through in your writing.
Yeah. I was very cynical. I was very angry because I grew up in a house that hated me for who I was. And so I think a lot about what my queerness is to me, and what it is. It's not my entire thing. It's part of me, but it's not my entire identity. It's kind of like me having ADHD. It's not my entire thing, but it is big. But my queerness, my superpower with my queerness is that it has taught me to take no bullshit from anyone. I had spent the first half of my life being talked down to, getting life filled with homophobic, vitriolic, and abusive comments. And it has taught me a very valuable lesson. And also being a writer and putting myself out there has taught me a very valuable lesson, in that there will be people, no matter what I do, who will hate me and dislike me or don't like what I do. And that's fine. That's the whole point of being, in the arts, is there has to be criticism of it. But I also am at a point in my life, I'm in my 40s now, and I'm at a point in my life where I just don't give a shit what people think about me, what people say about me. You love my books? Wonderful, thank you. You hate my books? Okay, that's your right to do so. That's totally fine with me. But the line of bullshit that I'm willing to take is gone, is done. That is my superpower, is that I am blunt and to the point. And if I think you're trying to string me along for something, I will call you out for it, because not many people do that. And I think it's important that we call out bullshit when we see bullshit.
You talking about your youth and, really sort of not, I don't want to say not being allowed to be who you are, but not being appreciated for who you are.
Oh, I wasn't allowed to be who I was. It was a very, very dark household.
Yeah. There's a lot in the book about not just the idea of being loved or being liked, but about being seen. What was a time for you where you were like, I feel seen, I feel like me? Is there something that comes to mind?
Oh, absolutely. And when I was a kid, I learned that things that brought me joy were things that could be taken away from me very easily. So I was the kid whose parents made fun of him for reading. I loved reading. I read anything and everything I could get my hands on. And with that came my desire and my love to write. So I kept these notebooks that I would fill with stories of whatever came into my head. I started at 6 years old and I just kept on writing. But again, it was something that I didn't tell anyone that I did. Not until 7th grade. Not until I got to my first class with two teachers named Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Pfeiffer. There was one time specifically that I remember this. And it was that we were given an assignment where we had to write a fictional story based upon a memory we had. And I can't remember what I wrote, but I do remember this is the early 90s, me walking in dressed head to toe in corduroy, because that was the cool style at the time, with my New Kids on the Block folder with my story in it. And that was the day that I learned the teachers were evil, because instead of doing what I thought they should do and take the stories home to read them, they gave us busy work and began to read them in front of us. And I saw my New Kids on the Block folder getting higher and higher in the pile. And I was a nervous, anxious kid. Like, I was a mess. And so, of course, I'm flop sweat. I'm sinking lower and lower and lower in my seat. And then it's my turn. It's my story. Mrs. Bentz opens it. and something happens that didn't happen with any of the other stories. And trust me, I was watching. She laughed. She started chuckling. She started laughing louder and louder. She started laughing so loud that Mrs. Pfeiffer came over to see what she was laughing about. And Mrs. Bent started the story over from the beginning. By the time that they both finished reading it, they were laughing so hard that they were crying. And that was the very first time in my life that I understood that the written word had power, that it can make people happy, that it can make people sad. Words can start religions, cults, wars, relationships, friendships, all of this stuff. It can destroy so much. But at that moment in time, I understood that words could make people happy. In my very last class with them, they told me they would see my name on a book in a bookstore one day. I am here because of Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Pfeiffer. Without them, I don't know where I'd be, especially since the following year in 8th grade, I had an English teacher who told me I should give up writing because I'll never amount to anything. If I had heard that without having Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Pfeiffer in my corner, that would have destroyed me. But I did have them. They were the first people in my life to tell me I was good at something. And I've never forgotten them. So much so that I went back to that tiny little crappy town in Oregon called Roseburg last year for the release of my book, In the Lives of Puppets. I went to the very same library that I went to as a kid that saved my life. And I got to stand there and give a speech in front of 300 people about how much Roseburg had tried to beat me down. But I was here and I was still here and I was going to continue doing what I was doing. What I did not know was that Mrs. Benson's son was in the audience. I told the story about Mrs. Benson and Mrs. Pfeiffer. They had both since passed away. And I did not know that Mrs. Benson's son was in the audience. And he came up to tell me afterwards that all he's ever heard about his mother from their former students is how much she supported them. And that to me is the greatest. I went back to this little tiny town that screwed with my head so much, only to come face to face with the son of the teacher who changed my life. And I got to tell that story. We didn't know each other. He didn't know I knew his mom. The only reason he knew is because I told that story. And it's just, that was one of the most magical, wonderful things that's ever happened to me, even if it did happen to be in a place like Roseburg, Oregon.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. It's so important to me because teachers are some of the most underpaid, underappreciated people in the world. I mean, to me, teachers should be the ones that are making millions of dollars every single year for what they do. But of course, that's only the politicians.
I agree. I am still in touch with one of my high school English teachers. I was not a big reader in high school. I barely finished the books. I only recently feel like I learned how to read. And now I host a book podcast, so shocking to all of us. But now I'm back in touch with this high school English teacher, and I get such a kick out of it, and she gets such a kick out of it. But she was also one of those people who, she was, like a hippie, very supportive of all of her students. And I grew up in a state that comes up in your book as a terrible, horrible place.
I wonder what state that is. Yeah.
I'm long since left.
Good. I'm happy for you.
But so being there, it was a very interesting, experience growing up. And without some of those teachers, we just wouldn't be who we are today. So
it's so funny when you talk to queer people, and a lot of queer people have that one teacher that saw them and then helped them. Many, many don't, but there's a bunch of us that have had that one teacher that meant everything to us.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, I want to give them all credit because I had multiple, and I didn't realize until much later in life how much that meant to me and how important it was, especially as a young queer person.
Yeah, and when I go and talk to
a little bit of a buoy.
Yeah, when I go and talk to students, I tell that story, and then I tell them, if you have a teacher like that in your life, tell them thank you, because you don't know if one day you'll not get the chance because, I graduated, moved on, went to college, and now I don't have a chance to do so. Tell that person now how much they have meant to you for doing what they do, because trust me, every teacher loves to hear that.
I was just texting with Byron Lane, and I've decided that Jason and Byron in Somewhere Beyond the Sea are inspired by and Byron Lane. Just FYI.
That's wonderful.
You were inspired by the two of us.
I am fully prepared for readers to be demanding a story about those two, Jason and Byron. They're going to be, and it's not going to happen, but I'm already prepared for it. I am already prepared for it.
Well, that you build these worlds where, for better or for worse, there can be so many more paths that people take down.
Exactly.
Speaking of, was it my imagination, or are there some coded references to The Wizard of Oz?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the opening, if you think about the opening of the house in the Cerulean Sea in an absolute gray and discolored world, and then you get to go to his version of Oz, which is the island, the ocean, and that's where he actually sees color for the first time. The Wizard of Oz, for anybody that has not seen The Wizard of Oz on a theater screen, I beg you, if you get the chance and it's playing in your area, go see it, because the moment that it pops into Technicolor is still one of the most transformational moments in film, in art, because it's beautiful. And so that the opening of the house in the Cerulean Sea was definitely meant to be an homage to The Wizard of Oz and Dorothy going from sepia tone Kansas to finding color for the first time in her life.
I mean, it's not even that, and it might be accidental, but this doesn't give anything away. But in Somewhere Beyond the Sea, there are lines like, well, why didn't you say so? Which is directly from The Wizard of Oz. And I'm going to miss you most of all, which is directly from The Wizard of Oz. So I feel like it was a test of how good of friends are you with
Dorothy. Yeah, it is.
I was like, I see you, TJ Klune. Yes, I'm as gay as you are. Thank you very much.
You got me there. You got me there. That is, yes, I'm very happy that you caught that, because not a lot of people get the little stuff like that. It just, I mean, man, congratulations. You are super gay. So
I will send you my address for the plaque. Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you talk about going to the island, seeing color for the first time, an escape. What's your island?
Where I live right now. So in October of last year, well, I have to go back even further than that. I moved from Arizona to the state of Virginia in 2013. Now, I don't know if anybody listening has ever been to Virginia, but it is the South, like hardcore the South. The more north you get in Virginia, the more, I don't want to say normal, but the less Confederate flags you see flying around in places. And I lived in Fredericksburg, which is about an hour south of Washington, D.C. And D.C. permeates everything like an infection. Everything is everything there. And so I told myself that I needed to get off the East Coast and that I wanted to move back to the Pacific Northwest by the time I was 40. Then 40 came and went. 41 came and went. I turned 42 last year, or I turned 41 last year. And in August of last year, I sat down and I thought, I hate this house. I hate this place. I don't want to be here anymore. Why haven't I done that? So in August, I got a realtor. In September, I bought a house. In October, I sold my house. And then I packed up my dog and my cat and drove from Virginia to Washington State I now live in a log cabin on 10 acres in the mountains. The town that's closest to me is a town called Leavenworth that is known for it's basically the Christmas capital of the United States, because they decorate 5 months out of the year for Christmas and they film Hallmark movies here. So
okay.
So I moved to my own...
I know what you're about to start writing.
Yeah, I moved to my own little corner of the world. And I mean, I'm looking out the window right now and I'm just seeing a vast expanse of forest and hills and trees. And it's just wonderful. This is my place. This is my happiness.
If we thought you wrote a lot of books before, now that you're in your log cabin...
Oh my God, I've already written 2 this year. I already wrote 2 books this year.
What? How? What do you do for fun?
Oh man, I do a lot of fun, but I also write a lot and very, very quickly. Yeah. I'm a very fast writer. I wrote a short novel, then I wrote a longer novel, and one of those isn't going to come out until like 2028. So
you can't write so quickly because, like, you know what? Keep writing, and then who knows? You'll have like books coming out posthumously for 20 years after you've died.
I have so many more ideas than I have left in life, that I have left in my life. So I will be writing until I'm put in the ground.
the book, I'm not going to lie, stressed me out.
Somewhere Beyond the Sea stressed you out?
Yes! Because of its subtlety, TJ. There were a few times I put it down and I'd turn to my husband and be like, this is too real. I need to put a pause on this for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But there's a line that comes up that says, a time will come where all of us have to make a choice between what is right and what is wrong. And it was so frustrating to read that because we learn that as children, right? The difference between right and wrong. And it is infuriating to think that the older we get, I say in quotation marks, the older some people get, they regress into forgetting how to navigate being human. And, there's a history of people not doing that particularly well. Why is it hard for people to understand the difference between right and wrong?
If I had that answer, man, I think that the world would be in a much better place because I hope I would be able to help spread that message. But I want to tell you about a kid I met. In 2022, I was asked to go to a very rural school in West Virginia. The place that the school was in was so rural that the school itself was kindergarten through 12th grade, all in one building. And I got to go there and speak with the 6th to the 12th graders. And I got up on stage, did my spiel, whatever, talked about books, talked about myself. Afterwards, I come to find out that the school board was upset because I'd used the word queer and that might have made someone very uncomfortable. And did I know that we shouldn't be using that word like that? I, laughed it off because I was saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Afterwards, I got to meet with a select group of students. I had this 12-year-old boy come up to me and he goes, I know all about the gay stuff. And I said, what do you mean, tiny little 12-year-old boy? And he goes, last year I had a girlfriend. He came out as trans and now he's my boyfriend. If it is that easy for a kid, why is it so difficult for adults? If it is that easy for a child to understand, accept, and move on, not make a big deal about anything, then why is it so hard for adults? Somewhere Beyond the Sea posits a very big question that I've been thinking about a lot lately. If so many things are done on behalf of children, removing books from their schools, targeting their queer or trans classmates, forcing them to do walkouts of their schools to protest everything that's going on, if all of things are going on, why is nobody asking the kids what they think? Why does nobody ask the kids what they want? They're smarter, more worldly than we ever were at their age because they have access to every piece of information known to humans through their phones.
Yeah.
The
adults in their lives don't like to think about
right,
it
but
way.
they know about wars, they know about genocides, they know about little things like laws being passed in their home states or towns or just in their schools that are targeting marginalized communities. They know. And something I feel bad, not always, but sometimes I feel bad saying this, but right now, I don't feel bad saying this. One day soon, all the white people in power are going to die. One day soon, they're all going to be gone. Now, who's going to take their place? It's going to be the young people coming up now. And the young people has the unenviable task to have to fix a broken world. But if anybody can do it, they can. I absolutely believe that.
So I will say, while the book stressed me out, that sentiment made me feel better. Right. Because that is also very clear in the book. Right. It's very much the children are the future.
Right. But it's also about being a parent and being a parent like Arthur. What I love about this book is Arthur's, his conflict. He's been teaching these kids to do exactly what they're doing, but it's stressing him out about it because he never thought that the day would come when they'd actually have to put that, or at least it would be here so quickly. So what does a parent do when what you've taught your children is what they're doing and what they're trying to speak up? But when do you take a step back and say, go fix the world, go change? Because we always want to protect them. We always want to protect those who need our protection. But what's the time where you step back and you say, you have to do this on your own. You have to make your own mistakes. You have to learn. And then Arthur gets told that by his own kids. They specifically, Sal will come out and say, Arthur, you've trained us, you've helped us grow, you've taught us about the way of the world. Now we actually have to put that into practice. And that's still a hard thing for Arthur to do, like I'm sure it's hard for many parents to do.
Sure. I mean, and people in general.
Yeah.
You know, putting their faith in others and people that they've inspired. That as an idea, as well as some other things throughout the book, there's like a hum of it gets better.
Yeah, but can I say, I think that It Gets Better program that they launched in schools was the absolute dog shit. I think that was the worst thing in the world.
I agree with you. I think I mean that sort of anecdotally, metaphorically, like Arthur having a moment of never believing that he would be able to find love, right? Like that is a concept of like, quote unquote, it getting better from his childhood. Right. Or these young people, it getting better from whatever their former situation was. Right. Unfortunately, the idea of it gets better has sort of been, turned into something.
Yeah. But no, it does. But it also shows that you have to put in the work to do that. You know, in order for the world to become a better place, in order for communities and groups of people, countries to become better places, it can't be done by just one or two people. It has to be done by everyone putting in as much as they can. But unfortunately, humans exist. People exist. You know, I often say, I really don't like people, but I love humanity because humanity gave us art and music and so many cool things. People just suck.
Sal in the book is expressing to probably Arthur, because there's a conversation about how it's problematic when you surround yourself by people who think like you and there's just this echo chamber. And I think Sal calls him out saying like, isn't that what we're doing? Right. And so how do I want to ask this? There's the idea of like, we're angry, you and I, right?
Yep.
And yet we also, here we are cis white gay men, and in this tiny moment, we're in this little echo chamber expressing the same things. How do you think it's possible, or what are practices that you maybe engage in to develop empathy for people outside of our little echo chamber? Right.
So I always want to go under, you know, because there's this saying that it's usually just stupidity, not malice, that people are acting with. Granted, we know plenty of people who act with malice and who are actual dangers to others. But you have people that are simply either A, have never even had the chance to even speak to, say, a queer person before. B, they've never read books with queer people in them. They don't. So it's, you know, it's the idea of the fear of what they don't understand. We use that word fear. You know, people will try to say, well, homophobia, I don't fear homosexuals. You know, you kind of do, because that's kind of what your whole thing is. But I think a lot about is just not understanding, not having the exposure, not having, you know, being so isolated in your own little world where everybody talks the same, acts the same, believes in the exact same thing. That's where I grew up. That's where I grew up, in this conservative little town where everybody believed in the exact same thing. And it wasn't until I got out into the world that I saw that that's not reality. That's a tiny little cross section of this infinite thing that is our world. And it blows, to me, what I do is, I first keep and always protect my no bullshit rule. Because if I feel somebody is actually just trying to egg me on and do something like that, done. Quiet. I'm not wasting my time. But if I actually have people who really want to hear, really want to change, let me tell you this. I went in deep in the pandemic, we had to do a lot of online book clubs. So one time, for the house in the Cerulean Sea, I got an invitation from a group I did not expect, a Southern Baptist church. So, you know, me with my own prejudices thinking, oh, this is going to be a shit show. There's row after row after row of white women in their 70s and their 80s. And they're all welcoming and wonderful, except for one. There's a lady in the top right corner who is glaring at me the entire time. So we had a great discussion about the book, blah, blah, blah. And of course, me sitting there thinking, well, I kind of had some biases that I didn't really, didn't pan out too well. Until the very next day, I get an email from, guess who? The very angry lady in the top right corner who didn't say a word aside from glaring at me the whole time. And in this email, I'm talking blocks and blocks and blocks of text.
Oh, geez.
She takes me to task. Why? Because of my inclusion of the Antichrist. How dare I include the Antichrist in the book? Do I know who the Antichrist is? Do I know what he's prophesied to do? And while she did come to care about the 6-year-old Lucy, she really wishes I'd gone in a different direction. But then, she ended the email with the best sign-off of anybody that I've ever received an email from. She ended, after taking me to task for the inclusion of the Antichrist, for going against her beliefs and blah, blah, blah. She ended the email saying, but I did not mind the homosexuals. So, think of it like this. I made her so mad about the Antichrist that she forgot how to be homophobic. That is how you win.
That's available as a t-shirt at tjklune.com.
I did not mind the homosexuals. Yes, exactly. And so to me, that just shows that people, they just need to have that door opened a little bit. And then all this light comes in and they won't mind the homosexuals.
Or it's like when you have pain in one part of your body and someone says, should I punch you somewhere else so that you don't feel that pain anymore?
Exactly. That's what it was like.
The Antichrist was punching somewhere else.
And then the gays were sitting in the back going, hooray. And then she was like, okay, I don't mind the gays now. It's totally fine.
Oh my God. So funny. I have to tell you, when I finished reading Under the Whispering Door, I emailed Sean because I see it as a stage play.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so one day, if it isn't already happening, because this was years ago, I'm like, oh, I know exactly how this thing will be on stage.
One day, I hope, man, because we know how Hollywood moves, very, very slowly with almost everything they do.
Not even just Hollywood, but I want to see it in a theater.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like on stage, not in a movie.
Oh God, that would be amazing too. Yeah, I would love to see all of that. I want to see books like In the Lives of Puppets as a musical. I want to see all these different things that happen with them. There's so many different cool things that can be done, but
yeah,
that's how it goes.
That said, before we go, are you a musical theater fan?
Not really. No, I'm a sad gay. I've never really been into musical theater. Like, let me tell you something.
You can't say you're a sad gay and include so many.
I have never seen Wicked. I have never seen any. Have I ever been to a play? I've been in plays.
What? What?
I don't know that.
Oh my God. I am coming up there right now. We're going to see a play.
In Leavenworth, Washington.
What?
Yes. I don't know that I've ever actually been to like a full on like sit down. This play is going to go on for like 3 hours and watch it. I've never done that.
What? I am shocked.
I know. Like I said, bad gay.
That has nothing to do with being gay. That's just like art culture. Have you never been to a museum?
Oh God, don't even get me started there. Of course, I've been to, but one of my favorite things about living near Washington, D.C. was all the museums that you could go to in D.C. were free. You could go into the Natural History Museum that takes days to explore, and you could stay as long as you want for free.
Yes, but not seeing a piece of theater is like saying you've never been to a museum.
No.
I'm very offended.
And now this episode is never going to air. I'm not going to say hi to James Scully now.
Didn't get me. Yeah. This one did. This thing did. Okay, so the reason why I ask after all of that, there's a role that made Barbra Streisand famous in a musical on Broadway called I Can Get It For You Wholesale.
Okay.
And she played a character. Well, no, Funny Girl came after.
Okay, I was going to say, I know Funny Girl.
She played a character named Miss Marmalstein.
Oh, I get where you're going with this now. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I was like, if I'm catching all of these Wizard of Oz references, am I catching a Barbara Streisand reference with Miss Marble Mom?
No.
Clearly not.
No, sorry.
Clearly
you missed that one.
I didn't miss it. I put it on you. I gave you more credit
than I deserved. Exactly.
Oh my God. TJ, who am I going to write to? I need to get you to a theater. What's going on? You appreciate storytelling.
Oh, I do.
And art. Like, you would love the theater.
Oh, I think I would too. I just have never gone.
Okay, well,
Will
I'm
do.
taking you to a theater.
Absolutely.
We're going to go see something fantastic. TJ, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on
Thank
Somewhere
you.
Beyond the Sea.
I'm so proud of that book. I hope you all enjoy it.
I am so excited. Today's guest gay reader, you might know him from his performances on screen in Problemista and Fire Island, or from his stage turn as the Pirate King in Pirates of Penzance at the Northeast School of the Arts, or as the Fairy King in Driscoll Middle School's acclaimed production of A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Where did you get this intel?
But most recently, he can be seen on Broadway in the super buzzy, much extended, incredibly acclaimed Oh, Mary. Today's guest gay reader, James Scully. Welcome to Gays Reading.
How did you know I was in A Midsummer Night's Dream?
I do my
in middle
research.
School?
I'm a
Like,
close
where did
reader.
I even say that?
You said it on some
That's-
other podcast.
I'm really impressed. Color me flattered and humbled.
You only play kings. Pirate King, Fairy King.
I only play subtextually homosexuals doing a camp performance of an idea of masculinity.
Yes.
Yeah. The Pirate King did that. Oberon
Right.
did that. Mary's acting teacher is certainly doing
Well,
that.
listen,
yeah.
this is what your agent sends out. If you want James, this is what you're getting.
Well, they're like, we got to work with what we got. Yeah.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
How is Oh, Mary going?
It's going really well. This is gross to talk about, but I think it's really interesting. Something cool about Broadway is the Broadway grosses come out every week, so you can actually see what each show is
Wait,
earning each
you
week.
just said it's gross to talk about. It's
And it was no pun intended. It's gross to talk about your gross, but here we are.
That's
Here I am
okay.
doing it. Because when you're an actor in television, you have to assume Netflix was earning money from you season 2. I have no idea how much or how any of that
Right.
worked, but we're still doing well in that department. Tuesday is always a happy day when it's like, oh, good, I can check and see evidence that the show's not slowly going bankrupt. The show's going great. Last night was really lovely. Ali Wong came. She was a delight, in case you're wondering.
all right, this is Gays Reading. I have to ask, James Scully, what are you reading?
It's a split track right now. So I go through binges. I don't read anything but scripts and
Yeah.
copy for months at a time. And then I'm like, oh my God, if I don't pick up a book, my mom is going to come to New York and beat the ever loving shit out of me. So yeah, no, she's an English professor. So right now I'm reading Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh.
Oh, yeah.
And I try to, whenever I'm reading her, because
I have
you
never
familiar?
picked up any
Have
of
you
her
read
books,
some of her
but all of her
stuff?
covers are gorgeous.
She was doing her graphic design, really understands the assignment. It's dark. It's dark and it's heavy. She takes a very unfortunate. Did you see the film version of Eileen? Maybe with Anne Hathaway? You should. It's good. It's really dark. It's really, did I mention that it was dark?
Okay.
No, it's very, she takes an unjudged but ultimately pessimistic look at humanity and what we're capable of doing to each other. So in order to balance that out, at the same time, I'm reading this, I guess it's young adult fiction called The Inheritance Games. It's a series by this author named Jennifer Lynn Barnes. And it's about a young poor woman who randomly inherits a huge multi-billion-dollar fortune from this man that she doesn't know. And then so she goes to the homestead and meets all of his actual descendants, many of whom are, of course, impossibly hot men who immediately fall in love with her. There's 2 brothers who are both in love with her, and she's in love with both of them, to the point where you're like, are we approaching an
Yes.
ancestral challenger situation? Is this good idea?
Right, the scans. Exactly.
I was like, how did I not notice when I actually was a young adult reading these books, how just insanely horny and fatuous they are. Because at that time, you're literally going through puberty. So you're like, no, this is normal. This is how I feel all the time. But now as a 32-year-old, I've calmed down a little bit. I'm not desperate for that at all times of the day. Yeah. So I'm reading these books and I'm like, whoa, these 18-year-olds are trying to up each other, but not, because it's a young adult novel. So it's all just like handkerchiefs and like gifts left outside the door and like stolen kisses. And yeah, that is like a perfect balm to the unflinching overt sism of Odessa, who I love. I wouldn't share for the world.
This is partly why I wanted to do this sort of coda of the series, because I'm a late in life reader. And the moment I started reading like 5 years ago and started talking to friends about, I mean, literally. And
you were like, I was illiterate before that.
I mean, basically, I would like read scripts and, working on projects and honestly working for theater works, I'd read a lot of children's books. And I started reading and I was like, oh, right. These are cool. Books are good. And then started to talk to friends about books. And all of a sudden they were like, oh, I'm reading such and such, or I'm reading that. And I was like, wait a minute. Books have never come up.
It's crazy how many gays are like posting like in tongues on their Instagram story. And I'm like, when do you have time to, I have never seen you. We've been at Fire Island together for weeks at a time. I've never even seen you look at a book.
Right.
When in your life of like presumably having a 9-to-5 job in marketing, I think, I'm not really sure. And like going on vacation to like Puerto Vallarta seemingly every other week and just like constantly being in a cable having sex. When do you have time to be reading these books?
Oh, James Scully is coming and reading these gays.
No, I'm not talking to myself. I'm talking about
that is
myself.
well, but that's sort of point. I'm just like I don't want to say you don't present as a reader because like what the hell does that mean? But like,
oh no, everybody who knows me is shocked. They're like, you can read, but we assumed somebody was feeding you your lines in like an AirPod on stage and you were just repeating.
Shocking, you actually know 2 books at a time. Like that's amazing.
Do I win?
Again, this is part of why I wanted to do this. It's not just the gays on Instagram who only post about books. It's everyone's a reader, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
Wait, did you read in tongues?
I haven't, but that's on the list now. That and everyone has been like, the chest clutching. You have to read.
Off the record, this is not worth the time. I'm gonna cut that out.
You should just beep out the name of the book.
Yeah.
And then see if people can guess what we're talking about. Not to tell you how to podcast, but I feel like
you're right. I've done that to spoilers
because
before.
You're going to get DMs and everybody's going to guess a different book. And then that'll be really interesting and revealing.
Oh.
Yeah.
I feel like I might have talked about it before, but it doesn't matter. You talked about Fire Island and the book that our conversation right now, the episode that this is going to be on, is with TJ Klune, the author, talking about his book Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which is a sequel to his book The House in the Cerulean Sea.
Oh, this is another one because my roommates at my last apartment read it and were like, I think I had actually bought the book. And then they were like, I didn't even read it. And then they were like, James, you have to read this. And then a friend was just in my apartment and pulled it off the shelf and was like, have you read this yet? And I was like, no, I haven't. Funny. And they were like, you would really like
there's
it.
Like, it's like a dash of YA, very like cozy, a little magical, very queer. You're on TJ's episode and he wrote.
Oh my God, what an honor. Please tell him I said, thank you for the work that you do. And I can't wait to read his book. I will
certainly let him know. So he wrote the sequel. Like he really needed to lay on thick the need for a special space for LGBTQIA plus people.
Sure. And he was also like, I'm trying to buy property on Fire Island, so I need to write another book. Right, sorry, TJ, exactly. I love you. I'm just being silly.
So this book is really about themes of belonging. Their island is not dissimilar from Fire Island. So I'm curious, in relation to you're on this episode, what was it like for you finding your safe space to be who you are?
Really painful and confusing, I think, which it's like, oh, wow, you're the only person to have that experience. But I think the funny thing often is that the biggest wall for a lot of queer people, especially when they become adults and move to a metropolitan area where they don't have to necessarily worry about the immediacy of being hate crimed every day or live under the thumb of a family that refuses to understand them. I think then the greatest obstacle is like instilled guilt that they're like, even though I know I want these things and even though they feel good, I feel ashamed and I feel embarrassed and I feel like I'm doing something wrong just by living naturally as who I am. And I think really, I didn't start understanding what it meant to be like queer, like actively queer, like embracing that as like a strong part of my identity until like Julio Torres, my partner, and I started dating. And then I was like introduced to this high functioning, highfalutin world of creatives, community organizers, just queers who were like, have actualized and then leveraged that identity to not only make money and take up space, but change the world. Jinx. And I was like, oh, this doesn't just have to be like, yeah, I'm like gay and I have a bunch of pretty girlfriends and we go to a bar and watch Drag Race sometimes and I'm gay. That's not like a valid and completely reasonable expression of yourself. But I was like, there's more that can be unpacked here. But in doing that, there were a lot of moments where I was brought up short by just this anxiety of, am I a bad person? Like going to Fire Island, living like, you're not using the video so people can't see me making that face. Going full tilt queer. Is this, as it were, is that bad? Am I bad? Am I ticks? Yeah, mostly the ticks. And I don't know. Not for me, it's not bad. It's what I needed, what I want. Yeah. And there's not a physical space. I would say that like the safe space is when I am in the company of my community, which is people like Julio Torres, Fran Tirado, Cole Escola, my cast members at O'Mary, my cast members that were in Fire Island with me. Tomas Matos is a safe space for really any queer person. Tomas Matos is like a mobile, moving, safe space. And more broadly now, I'm, even if I don't know the person, I'm better when I'm at a party, when I'm out in public at identifying who the safe spaces are. And the calling of my 30s, I think, as I leave the maelstrom of my late 20s, is to make myself into that. I actively find younger gays that I feel might be adrift. And I'm like, hey, I'm your mom now. And when I'm at parties, I try to be the person who's, okay, you did too much of whatever you did. I'm gonna stroke your back while you sweat and vomit or cry or lay motionless on the floor and everything will be okay. And I think I find, especially because I'm in a desirable position, the generation, we both had a chance to experience a queer renaissance in our own lives that didn't have the shadow of a Republican government and or the AIDS epidemic hanging over us like a guillotine, right?
I assume you remember time before Grindr?
I have never had a Grindr account, so it's always been a time before Grindr with me.
Right. So yeah, but like, I needed to date, but without Grindr.
Right. And more important, and so between us and the generation above us, I feel like sometimes when I've had to try to have deep, meaningful connections with like older gays, there's obviously a lot of just like life wisdom there. But sometimes when it comes to the queerness of it all, it's like they didn't have the open arena that we did. And I can't be a time machine for you. I can't give you those years back. And so there's a lot of natural and expected friction there. But for me, to the people who were as young as I was at those times in those relationships, now looking back, I feel like I can very intentionally try and break that, not come to them with a sense of resentment of you're getting to live a life I never had, even though a little bit they are, but it's also I got to live that life I'm getting to live that life. And also I want to like leave an open, clear path for them to whatever they want that life to be. And I find that really rewarding when like young queer people feel comfortable being themselves around me. I'm like, oh good, I'm living right.
We were talking about Fire Island. The film Fire Island that you were in is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Have you ever read Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah, my mom's a huge Jane Austen person. So is my sister.
I've never read it. Is there a Jane Austen that you'd recommend to someone who's never read Jane Austen?
I mean, Pride and Prejudice is like Yeah, I would say it like holds up. If that sounds appealing to you, I think sometimes, again, everybody should be living their own bliss. And if you don't like period English, then don't force yourself to read Pride and Prejudice, especially when there's like numerous contemporary adaptations of it, just because you think that's like the smart literary thing to do. But if you're like, yeah, I think I'm into Jane Austen's voice as an author, which like reasonably you could be. Obviously, she's prolific and universally beloved.
Right.
Then crack open Pride and Prejudice, or crack open Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I also read that and found it super rewarding.
I think it's more about like getting the references, right?
Which I will say, it's super rewarding to go back and read something like Pride and Prejudice and realize, oh my God, it's so many of the things I love are brain children ultimately of this story.
It's like the foundation of, yeah. And I think that's sort of my impulse, and that's it. Maybe I'll do like a good solid Wikipedia read.
And why not? Yeah.
All right. So you sort of read yourself / read your gay brothers. Do you have something else that's like a little quick read? What's your hot take? What are you complaining about these days? Anything?
Pedestrian traffic and bike traffic in Manhattan should work the same way that car traffic does everywhere else in the United States.
Yes.
Traffic moves on the right. If you need to pass, you move into the middle of the lane, you pass, and you move back over to the right. Yes. You don't drift lazily and slowly in the middle of the lane. You don't walk people across. I don't fucking care that your family came to visit the city with you. You walk
and if you have to stop, you move over to the shoulder.
Yes. So many people wandering out into the middle of the bike lane without looking. So many cyclists in the middle of the bike lane going slow as fuck. It's not my job to swerve out into traffic because you don't understand how a bike lane works. And the only bad thing about O'Mary is that we obviously work like on Times Square, and getting to the theater every day. There's all of these fucking tourists who think, look, baby, I appreciate that you spent like $6,000 just to get your family of 8, which maybe that's a problem. Let's start there, to the city. Maybe you could have just had 2 kids and take it. I digress. It's not your jungle gym. This is not your living room. Like, why are you guys walking 8 across down the sidewalk? And like, when you do that, and then they're like shocked when we have to push through them, it's like, where was I supposed to go? I'm not going to walk out into the street because you're rude and thoughtless. That's what I'm not going to do.
There is an element to say, in my younger days, I've scolded some people.
Oh,
and I think
when I'm on my city bike, there's a lot of, what are you doing?
They take that as like they're in New York now moment.
Which sucks. It makes them stronger.
You're such a fantastic reader. Look at you. I'm thrilled to have you. Thank you for being here.
This was really fun. Thank you for doing this. This was like such a nice midday punctuation.
Oh, I'm so glad. Tell your mom I'm really proud of how much you read these days. And
she's going to love that.
And tell her to listen to Gays Reading, because we're not just for the gays.
Okay, I will. You're also, you're for the moms.
We're for the moms.
The gays are for the moms.
I have the best mom book for you to recommend to her. It's called Sandwich by Catherine Newman.
Okay, somebody recently suggested this to me as well.
This book is so great. Highly recommend. I call it a mom book.
That's good, because the last book I recommended to her, she fucking hated. So I don't even remember the name. Okay. Which is too bad, because this would have been another funny beep moment. But
I know exactly. Yeah, she's probably heard of it. She'll be like, "I read it, James. Don't worry."
Maybe I can redeem myself with Sandwich by Catherine Newman. She's probably already read it. Thank you, darling.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, James.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, TJ Klune. Thank you so much, James Scully. You're both terrific. Next week, we have an exciting author whose last book was acclaimed and adapted into a movie starring some of your favorite actors, and he will be here to talk to us about his newest book. And our guest gay reader, it is the person who is credited with a joke that completely blew my mind. You have to just come find us next week to find out who that is. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you'll know as soon as that episode drops. See you next week. Bye.